Audio effect racks in Ableton Live open up some really amazing possibilities, particularly when it comes to things like sound design. And in this video, I want to explore just one of these possibilities by showing you how you can use an audio effect rack to create a really cool feedback system, particularly useful for sound design. Let's dive right in. Okay, so in this first part of the video, I'm going to show you how to set up this audio effect rack with feedback for yourself. Fair warning, it's quite detailed, it's quite nerdy, so if you'd rather just skip to see the application of this, you can download my free feedback rack in the description below, then jump to the timestamp in the video to see exactly some of the ways that you can use it. Otherwise, if you'd like to build it for yourself, follow along in this part of the video. Okay, so to set this up for ourselves, all we're going to need to do is start with a compressor. And then on this compressor, I'm going to group this to an audio effect rack by pressing Command or Control and G. And this is going to be our feedback in signal. So I'm going to open up this audio effect rack a little bit further by opening up the chain list here, and then just renaming this to FB in. Next, I'm going to create another chain by right-clicking and clicking Create Chain. And this chain is going to be our through signal, our dry signal. So I'm going to rename this to through. And this first chain, we're going to name this to FB in. So this is our fed back signal. Next, I'm going to duplicate this rack by selecting it and pressing Command or Control and D, renaming this rack to FB out. And then this one's going to be slightly different. We're going to have three different chains here. We're going to have this first one, which is going to be our FB out. We're going to have this second one, which is our wet. And we're going to have this third one here, which is our dry signal. We're also going to delete the compressor from this FB out signal right here. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and group these two audio effect racks together by selecting the last one, selecting the first one, and then pressing Command or Control and G. And so what we're trying to do here is have a signal that goes through this first audio effect rack, then goes through some sort of processing in between this fed FB in rack and this FB out rack, which we'll put in the middle. And then we want this FB out rack to send its signal back into the FB in signal to then get reprocessed by the processing that is in between these two racks here. And luckily, using audio effects racks makes this really easy, and this is why we have the compressor here. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the sidechain input section of this compressor, and then click on the sidechain toggle so that we're receiving a sidechain input. Then I'm gonna select the audio from drop-down menu to be the track that this compressor or this rack is on. Next, if we go to the second drop-down menu, you can see I get a bunch of options here. And what these options are allowing us to do are tap into the signal at any point in this audio effects chain in any of these different audio effect racks. So if I didn't have any of these racked up, we wouldn't be able to do this. But because I do, I can actually select, say, the FB out rack right down the bottom, and I can select this FB out post effects right here. And so now we have the signal going through the FB in to the FB out, and then this FB out is being fed back in to this FB in here. But in order for this compressor to actually output the signal that it's listening to, I just need to engage this little headphone icon right here. Now, at this point, don't send any audio through because you're gonna get a crazy amount of fed back signal, which we need to be able to control somehow. In order to do that, I'm gonna use a utility in this audio effects section here. So I'm going to search for utility, click and drag and drop this into the FB out chain. Then what I'm going to do is map this gain to the first macro control of this FB out rack by right clicking, clicking on map to macro 1. And then I'm going to go to the map options, leave the minimum at -infinity and set the maximum to 6. And this is going to allow us to control the level of the signal being fed back into the start of the chain here, because this compressor is receiving the signal post the effects in this FB out chain. I warned you this was going to get a little bit nerdy. Next, let's exit this mapping section, and I'm going to mute this FB out chain right here. And now we have our basic feedback setup, but what we need to be able to do from here is also be able to hear the dry signal. So that's where we're going to come down to this dry chain, and we're going to put another compressor in this dry chain here. And this compressor is going to read the signal before any of this feedback happens. So in the same way that I did with this compressor here in the FB in rack, I'm going to go to this compressor here in this FB out rack on the dry chain, open up the sidechain section, enable the sidechain input, audio from the exact same track that we're on here, and select this as the audio effect rack in its entirety pre-effects. Next, of course, I need to be able to listen to the signal. So I'm just going to click on this little headphone icon right here. And now so that we can control the balance of the wet or the fed back signal versus the dry signal, I'm going to go ahead and map this wet chain volume here to macro 2 and this dry chain volume to macro 3. And let's just hide all but 4 macros so we get access to these. Rename this first one wet and this second one dry. Now, to stop things from going overboard, this last step is really, really important. Again, before we run any audio through this, I'm gonna go ahead and put a limiter just after this FB out rack here, set the release to auto, set the ceiling to 0, and now we're stopping this signal from ever exceeding this peak value of 0 dB, which is really useful when we're working with feedback. It allows us to keep a nice, safe level. With this limiter, as I can, I'm also going to unlink the left and the right channels, just so we have a more transparent limiting going on here. Last, let's pretty things up a little bit. I'm going to close this limiter. I'm going to close up this feedback out chain. I'm going to close up this feedback in chain. And then I'm going to go ahead and put an audio effect rack in between this FB in and this FB out. And this audio effect rack is where we're going to put all of the effects that we're actually going to use to process the fed back signal. Just so that we can get those controls back, I'm actually going to unfold this FB out rack here and just hide the chain list so that we get access to those macros that we set up before, this being the feedback level. And I'm going to pull this all the way down to -infinity. So to test that this works, I'm going to go ahead and add a delay into this middle audio effect rack. I'm going to set the dry wet all the way to 100% and pull the feedback down to 0. So here on this audio effect track, I've just put a single snare hit. And so you'll hear immediately that if I play this snare hit, we're going to get 2 iterations of the snare hit. We're going to get the dry signal, and then we're going to hear the delayed version of the signal. So now to test that the feedback works, I'm going to increase this feedback level. And what we should hear is a typical delay effect where we have a trailing out in level of the delayed signal. We can increase the feedback level to get a longer delay tail. And it's working like a typical delay. Now you might be thinking that is a lot of setup for just a delay like this. Let me show you why this is so damn cool. Before I do though, if you'd like to learn more from me outside of these free YouTube videos, I'd love to invite you to check out my monthly membership offerings where you can get access to things like monthly exclusive video tutorials, live sessions, and even one-on-one sessions with me. If membership's not right for you, I also offer a selection of self-paced online courses. For example, I just released a bass sound design for electronic music fundamentals online course. Or if you're really not up for spending money, but you want to stay up to date with what I do and some of my offerings, I have a simple monthly newsletter that you can sign up to with the link below, and a Discord where I'm actually running monthly online challenges as well. You can find links for all of those things in the description below. So instead of using this rack that I've set up here, I'm actually going to turn this off and collapse it by double clicking, and we're going to use the free MTM feedback rack that you can download with the link in the description. And if we take a look at this, you can see it's basically the exact same thing that we'd set up previously, except for all the macro controls are just in the front of the rack instead of in the middle. And we also have a control for the limiter gain going into the limiter as our last macro control here. So let's go ahead and add the delay once again to the effects section, pull the dry wet all the way up to 100 and the feedback all the way down to 0. And you'll hear once again that if I increase the feedback, we get that kind of delayed signal. So now let's insert something else into the feedback loop. A really classic and really audible example is something like a pitch shifter. So I'm going to use Ableton Live's shifter device, and I can place it either before or after the delay. Let's go ahead and place it before the delay in this instance and switch it to pitch mode. Next, I'm going to set the coarse to 1 semitone. And as I increase the feedback, take a listen to what happens now to the delayed signal. Every single time the delayed signal is fed back into itself, we're going to increase the pitch of it by 1 semitone. So now we get this rising pitch effect in the delay instead of just a typical delay. I could go down 1 semitone. And if I increase the feedback high enough, say to 0 dB, we can get basically an infinitely delaying signal with this changing in pitch. And then if I change one of the parameters in the shifter, now, as you would have noticed there, I was playing consistently with this feedback control level because if it went too high, we would get a really, really loud and distorted signal, which is exactly why I have the limiter at the end, and that's exactly why you need the limiter there as well. So now that we understand how this works, let's go ahead and have some fun and play around with some cool effects inside of this feedback loop. Most of the time, we want to start with something like a delay or reverb, so we can leave this delay here. I'm going to set this to a time bass instead of a sync bass. We can leave this shifter set to pitch mode, so we have this increase of a single semitone each time. I'm going to go ahead and add a reverb as well after this delay, and we're going to maybe set this to a little bit less than 50% and increase the decay quite a bit too. Let's go ahead and maybe add some chorus to give it a little bit more width just after the delay, decrease the amount slightly, increase the warmth, and let's run this drum break through instead of this single snare sound so that we get a sense of what it sounds like. That's pretty chaotic. Let's go ahead and adjust like the delay time. Add some filtering, maybe with an EQ, remove the low frequencies. Let's try something else, maybe like a vocal sample. Let's go ahead and change this delay so that it's back on synced, maybe set it to quarter notes or something instead, increase the decay on this reverb, maybe the dry wet too, change the filter. Maybe let's go ahead and add like a beat repeat or something just before the shifter so that we get some kind of random glitchiness going on too by just increasing the variation, maybe reducing the chance and playing around with some of the parameters in this effect. And last but not least, let's go ahead and add like a grain delay in here as well, maybe after this delay, so that we get the really kind of grainy effect. Duplicate the shifter. A whole wide world of sound design possibilities. So there you have it. That's a cool way that you can use audio effect racks to create a really interesting and intricate feedback system inside of Ableton Live. If you'd like to grab my free MTM feedback rack, you can find a link in the description. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed. Stay awesome, and I'll see you all in the next video.